Hello and welcome back to Dr. Owen's Muscle Medicine. Today's video is a really exciting one about creatine supplements and the scientific evidence surrounding the claims that they may or may not cause hair loss. Stick around to learn what the latest peer-reviewed evidence has to say, but first, let me explain why I'm so excited about this one. It seems like only yesterday I was editing a video in which I hear myself lamenting the lack of good quality scientific data with which to answer the creatine hair loss question. And, well, frankly, it was yesterday. How frustrating that for the longest time, all we really had to go on is a 20-person, 3-week study published all the way back in 2009 that didn't even measure hair loss directly, but instead found that a 25 gram per day creatine loading week, followed by 2 weeks of 5 grams per day, had the effect of increasing blood levels of dihydrotestosterone, or DHT levels, in the creatine group of 10 rugby-playing individuals over the placebo group of 10 rugby-playing individuals not taking creatine. That was literally all we had to go on, with no study ever replicating or refuting this finding, and with no study ever directly looking at the hair loss question by measuring the hairs on your head. This study, again, never replicated, but never until now directly contradicted, slotted nicely in with our mechanistic understanding of male pattern baldness, in which long-term DHT exposure of susceptible hair follicles causes them to shrink down and produce progressively thinner and weaker hairs until the hairs are eventually so puny they fail to even break the surface of the skin, and the baldness process is then complete. However, the suggestion that creatine could elevate DHT levels was a novel finding that we would really like to see more data on. And certainly, if we had buckets of corroborating data, this would be quite something. Yet, despite creatine being a solidly well-studied, safe and commonly used supplement for over 30 years, we had no other data on creatine and DHT. But the reason I'm back so soon talking about the exact same thing is that somebody up there, or over there, or, as it transpires in this case, at a university in Iran, heard my feeble cries for more scientific data, and the e-publication of a new peer-reviewed study on creatine and hair loss, the first of its kind, has just been published. That's probably quite enough trumpeting. Let's crack on and explore the paper, critique its strengths and weaknesses, and finish off by discussing what the relevance of the findings might be to you and me. Right, so here it is. First thing that jumps out is that this is just a 12-week study, useful in picking up findings in something that causes explosive hair loss, but too short to discover a more insidious process, potentially. And it's got 38 participants, all aged between 18 and 40, all male and all resistance training at least 3 times a week during the study. 19 of them took 5 milligrams of creatine per day, and 19 took a placebo white powder also dissolved in water without knowing who's who. Now let's scroll through the abstract for some spoilers. The results. That'll spoil the retention curve on this video. Let's get into it. What did they find? No statistically significant difference in the hair loss or DHT between groups. Instead, the only findings of statistical significance in this case is an overall increase in total testosterone over time in both groups, but a decrease in free or unbound testosterone. Maybe the participants upped their training intensity now that researchers were tracking them and holding them accountable with weekly check-ins and monitoring. Maybe they just began complying with going 3 times a week when they previously didn't. Let's read more. So the intro is just a spiel about creatine being popular and useful, and just referencing that one 2009 study that I'll link below, from which we were basing all of our previous speculations about creatine and hair loss. So in the methodology here, they state that they've excluded anyone who's taken a medication for male pattern baldness before, which may have screened out anyone with really severe male pattern baldness, but seeing as it's got a prevalence of about 50% of the adult population, it's likely that at least some people involved in the study will have male pattern baldness or will go on to develop it. And they've just ruled out some other common causes of hair loss as well. Then we move down to the study protocol, stable diets, 3 resistance sessions a week, monitor for creatine or training there before. Next, the randomization process. Lovely, they got some rando not otherwise involved to generate random numbers on a computer and assign participants to the creatine or placebo groups based on this. Top-notch stuff. And the participants and the hair measurement researchers were blinded to what group everyone was in. Awesome. We had 6 pre-game dropouts and 1 creatine group member dropout, and they've gone on to adhere to their local ethical standards. It's great. They named their brand of creatine but did not use a product that had been lab verified to be free of contaminants. 5 milligrams per day is a pretty standard typical protocol, so it gives us useful data with which to extrapolate to our situations, even if effects might have been produced at radically higher doses. And on to the blood markers. They measured testosterone, free testosterone, i.e. the testosterone circulating in the blood serum itself and not bound to any carrier proteins, DHT and creatinine, and they were all drawn at the same time of day from the same site for all participants and immediately analysed. I rate this highly given the diurnal variation in the above hormones, though we don't know how these timings pertain to resistance training timings and whether or not blood was drawn on a training day. Next, the hair assessment. This is the stuff that nobody's ever done before. They did two things. They took photos of the scalp over the vertex or the crown, which is an area typically affected in male pattern baldness, and plucked hairs out and analysed their thickness and stage of the hair growth cycle under a microscope. Now the heavy stuff, stats. Firstly, they confirmed that there were no statistically significant differences in the measured outcome variables at baseline between the two groups. An analysis was done looking for both changes in time and changes between the two groups, and a rank-based analysis was performed as this reduces the effect of individual outliers, which is useful in a small study like this. On to the results. Here's the hair measurements. Here we see total testosterone increasing over time and free testosterone, the component circulating freely in blood serum, not bound to carrier proteins, going down over time, with DHT remaining static. I repeat, static. The ratios of DHT to testosterone, therefore, and DHT to free testosterone also changed over time. However, there's no statistically significant difference between the creatine group and the placebo group, which again makes me suspect that they're all just taking their training and diets seriously and reaping some benefits in terms of testosterone levels for this. Good for them. And here are the study findings in graph form. We can see testosterone up top, DHT along the bottom. That's all good. We got both groups tracking each other closely enough, and there's no statistically significant differences here. And the hair loss graphs. Again, both groups seem to, when it comes to hair count or follicle units or density of hair, the groups are sufficiently tight-knit that there's no statistically significant difference between them. So, over 12 weeks, in healthy young men undertaking resistance training in Iran, creatine causes neither hair loss nor an increase in DHT. And in summary, that leaves us with one pretty well thought out but limited in size and scale study that found no creatine-induced hair loss or DHT gain over 12 weeks versus a 2009 study that didn't measure hair loss but found an increase in DHT over 3 weeks in a study of 20 people initially taking a 25 milligram loading dose and then 5 milligrams. Certainly, the evidence is a long way from damning, and you can probably feel quite good about cracking on. Still, if you are on the fence, might be worth tracking your hair loss or shedding before starting, as hair shedding is part of the natural life-death cycle of all the hairs on our head anyway, and is happening all the time. Therefore, if you were to wait until you start taking creatine to become aware of hair shedding, then you'll likely find it and make an association that we don't have any solid scientific evidence that this association is causal. And or you could take progress photos of your hairline, and again, start before you take creatine, because the biggest confounder with male pattern baldness in those with the genetic susceptibility is going to be time, because if you have the genetic susceptibility, and hence the hair follicles that will shrink in response to long-term DHT exposure, then over time, as you continue to engage in healthy habits promoting testosterone levels, resistance training, etc., then you're going to encounter hair loss as a fraction of this testosterone continues to be converted to DHT and delivered to the scalp, creatine or no creatine. But this study suggests creatine is not going to be driving the process in a meaningful way. As always, even more data would be better, but this massively increases the available amount of data on the issue, so happy days. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. Goodbye.